Hello everyone, I am Vetted Kirby, and welcome to my channel, The Commander Tavern. The Commander Tavern is a channel dedicated to my favorite Magic the Gathering format. The Brewery is a series on this channel showcasing my spicy brews under the deck text. On this episode of The Brewery, I'll be discussing my take on a commander from the Brothers' War, Gix Yawgmoth Praetor. If you like this deck or any of the cards mentioned throughout the video, please consider using my TCG Player affiliate link when purchasing those cards. You can find that link down in the description. It'll really help out the channel. But the very best way you can help support the channel is with my Patreon. There are plenty of perks for being a patron, such as early access to certain videos, exclusive deck text, gifts, and more. You can also support my channel for free by simply liking, subscribing, and sharing, which also helps out a lot. I put out a video every Monday, so you don't want to miss out. You can join my Discord server for free if you want to join the Commander Tavern community. All pertinent links are down in the description. Alright, let's get back to the episode. Gix is a 3/3 Phyrexian Praetor for 1 generic and 2 black. He has a triggered ability where any player hitting any of your opponents with the creature can pay 1 life to draw a card. This is very similar to Edric's Spymaster of Trest in that it might seem like a group hug effect, but not if you're the one making the most of it. While we're not working to necessarily make this effect one-sided, we can still punish opponents for it, which we'll see in a bit. In any case, we're the ones making the most of this ability, and I will be applied the same evasive weenie aggro strategy I showcased in both my Edric deck tech video, as well as my Dalsim video, which you can find links for in the description. Now, what can you do once you have a thick hand? Discard it to his activated ability. For 7 mana and discarding X cards, you can exile the top X cards of an opponent's library and play their lands and cast their spells for free, as long as those cards remain exiled. So even if Gix is no longer around after resolving the ability, you get to steal their stuff. Super flavorful and super busted. Just because we're mono black doesn't mean we can't play other colors, right? Let's start off then with how we're going to be filling our hands with cards that'll not only fuel Gix's activated ability, but also give us our responses, mana acceleration, etc. First off, the best 1-drops in the deck are Changeling Outcast and Tormented Soul. These are just straight up unblockable. Sure, they can't be used to chump block, but that's what our other weenies are potentially for. But these will always be swinging and always draw us cards. Prickly Boggart is another 1-drop that can potentially be unblockable. Fear means that it can only be blocked by either black and or artifact creatures. While this might not always be the case, chances are you might find someone to swing into. The rest of the 1-drops are the flyers: Signal Pest, Hope of Girapur, Battlefly Swarm, Sturge, Pilfering Imp, Eye Collector, Eye Twitch, Nightshade Stinger, and Blightkeeper. I know, Single Pest doesn't fly, but it can't be blocked unless the creature has flying or reach. It just can't block any flyers. But for all effects and purposes, just like the rest of the cards here, it can't be blocked except by flyers and reachers. While these were included solely because they're flying 1-drops, some of these still have useful abilities, like Hope of Girapur, which can potentially silence an opponent. Signal Pest also helps us boost our attack with Battle Cry, which makes a huge difference when swinging in with a wave of weenies. The following 2-drops are harder to block than these though, since Nether Trader, Dothy Voidwalker, Dothy Horror, Dothy Ghoul, Dothy Warlord, Dothy Cutthroat, and Dothy Slayer have Shadow, while Way Scout has Horsemanship. So few players run creatures with either Shadow or Horsemanship that these are almost guaranteed to get through. Just like the first 2 unblockable 1-drops, these Shadow creatures won't be able to block anything without Shadow, but that's fine since we mostly care about attacking with them anyways. Some of these are also pretty useful, like Dothy Voidwalker, but they're all really mostly for being unblockable 2-drops. We can also make any other creature unblockable with Dothy Embrace, Rogue's Passage, Access Tunnel, Shizo Death's Storehouse, and Whisper Silk Cloak. Keep in mind that Dothy Embrace can give Shadow to any creature, so if you really needed to use one of those Dothy creatures to chump block, just give the attacker Shadow for that pro-gamer move. The 3 lands don't take up slots in the deck, and while Shizo doesn't give outright unblockability, Fear isn't negligible. Whisper Silk Cloak also gives Shroud as a bonus, which is key at protecting the deck's key creatures. There are a couple of them since most of the weenies are just attack fodder and don't really matter if eliminated. But Gix and the rest of them are, so the deck's also running Lightning Greaves, Swiftfoot Boots, Commander's Plate, Champion's Helm, Hammer of Nazan, and Plaza of Heroes to protect them. Protection also gives the potential of making a creature unblockable, so if Gix were equipped with it, then he can attack to anyone without black or colorless blockers, which is pretty useful. Another way of taking advantage of all of these unblockable effects is with Vorpal Sword. Yes, it does cost a whopping 8 mana to activate, but the deck is mono black, so mana generation isn't a big deal. Also, you're not really winning off of the weenie army anytime soon. If that happens, it's more for grindier matches. Ideally, we want to steal our opponent's bombs, but if not, once we have the mana, we can start eliminating opponents once per turn. Now, constantly attacking with weenies that we can't really block with does leave us in a difficult position where we wouldn't be able to block ourselves. Plus, if we're paying 1 life for each connecting weenie, that will really set us back in terms of life total. Thankfully, the deck is running Whip of Erebos and Exquisite Blood to counteract that. The whip giving life gain to all of our creatures means that at the very least, we're gaining back that life that we're paying to draw the card. Just make sure that you put the triggers accordingly onto the stack. We want to gain life before we resolve Gix's triggers. With Exquisite Blood, we also gain life when those opponents are smacked by our own creatures, but also when they get smacked by anyone else, and when they pay life to draw cards off of Gix, and for any other reason they take damage or lose life. Now, while I'm not running it here, you could include Sanguine Bond if you wanted to. Not only is this an instant win combo, but incredibly easy to pull off in this deck, and we can also assemble it fairly quickly thanks to digging so deep through our deck, so if you want to go for it, go for it. Back to gaining life, Sheoldred the Apocalypse is included in the deck. Not only is she another way of inspiring your opponents to not trigger Gix, but we'll also gain 2 life each time we draw a card. So we're buffering that life loss by gaining a net life of 1 each time we connect with an attacker and trigger Gix. She's amazing in this deck. Honestly, the only reason I can see someone not running her is because of her current price on the secondary market. Ouch. Underworld Dreams is another decent deterrent against triggering Gix since they lose 1 life for each card drawn. They lose life whenever they draw cards anyways, but drawing off of Gix will make that too. And if we also have Sheoldred and Exquisite Blood in play, they'd really be giving us a ton of value as well as losing significant life just to draw a card off of Gix. Alhammar's Archive is another way to not only make the most of the life we can gain, but the cards we can draw. On its own, it does neither, but with Gix we can at least draw 2 cards at the cost of 1 life. But then when we are gaining life, we gain twice as much, further fueling our card draw engine as well as buffering against any potential barrage from opponents. Lastly, Pontiff of Blight has the potential of gaining us a ton of life. Not only does it have Extort itself, but it also gives Extort to all of our creatures. Once we're generating a ton of mana, any spell we can cast can have any amount of black mana sunk into it for as many creatures as we control. If we have 3 opponents, we'll gain thrice that much life. For example, if we had 5 creatures along with the Pontiff and cast a spell, having 5 spare black mana, each opponent will lose 5 life and will gain that much back. 3 opponents, 15 life. Don't sleep on this card, not just in this deck, but in any mono black deck. It is amazing. However, even though most of the deck's creatures are just 1 and 2 drops, we've already seen quite a couple of other permanents and activated costs that require a hefty investment in mana. Even the previous example with Pontiff of Blight. Yet, as I mentioned earlier, that's not that big of a deal for mono black decks. While the deck is not green, black is definitely not too far behind from green in mana acceleration. Grim Hireling synergizes amazingly with the deck since we'll almost always have unblockable creatures to swing in with. So long as we connect with 1 per opponent, we can make up to 6 treasures each turn, which is definitely nothing to scoff at. If that weren't enough, we can also use those treasures to take out any problematic creatures, even indestructible ones. Kyrich, Son of Yawgmoth, and Defiler of Flesh also help us out, but at the cost of life. While Kyrich can be used to pay for any black mana as if it were Phyrexian mana, the Defiler can only do so once and only once for permanent spells. But that's okay. If we have enough life, the Defiler alone is enough to help us free cast almost all the deck's Weenies. Kyrich himself also has lifelink and he gets huge thanks to casting so many cheap black spells. And then if we're able to make him unblockable, he becomes quite the threat, all while also gaining us a ton of life in the process. Nyx Lotus and Nykthos Shrine to Nyx will tap down for an absolute insane amount of mana, as is the case with any monocolored deck. Their inclusion should be obvious. These alone can help for activating Gix or for paying an epic extort cost. Same with Cabal Coffers and Cabal Stronghold. Their inclusion should be pretty obvious. While Cabal Coffers itself won't tap for mana, the deck is running 15 swamps, so it, along with Cabal Stronghold, will definitely tap for a ton of mana. The Coffers especially, since Urborg Tomb of Yawgmoth is obviously included as well. While Urborg and the Coffers might seem a bit expensive on the secondary market right now, there used to be a time when the Coffers alone cost what their cost now along with Urborg and the Stronghold. In any case, Urborg also makes Gauntlet of Power, Caged Sun, Cryptghast, and Arcana Revenant even better in the deck. With the artifacts, not only will the lands tap for black add an additional black mana to our mana pool, but they also pump our black creatures +1/+1. These effects start adding up when we have a lot of them together on the battlefield, especially when all of our Weenies start getting bigger but can't be blocked. Cryptghast and Arcana Revenant only work with the swamps, but as just seen, the deck already has 15 basic swamps, but Urborg too, so these will definitely help out in the mana acceleration department. Wayfarer's Bauble, Navigation Orb, Burnished Heart, Canoptic Wraith, Sword of the Animus, and Sword of Hearth and Home also help us get those swamps out as if we were a mono green deck. As a bonus, the Wraith is entirely unblockable, so we can use it for mana acceleration in the early game or as an unblockable creature later on in order to keep triggering Gix. The swords are able to ramp us consistently each turn, and we don't even have to worry about the creature dying in combat since we can just equip them to an unblockable creature and call it a day. They also pump the equipped creature, which is a nice bonus. The blink effect from Sword of Hearth and Home might seem useless in the deck, at least beyond blinking a tapped creature to have it untapped to block. But there is one creature we're going to see soon that we'd love to blink once a turn. Soul Ring and Ancient Tomb are also obviously included in the deck, but it's to be expected. There aren't many generic costs in the deck, but for those in it, we might as well run these. At least they're enough to pay for Cabal Coffers and Nykthos. Alright, so we're drawing a ton of cards, gaining a ton of life to bypass the life loss, and generating a ton of mana to pay for these costs and more, specifically Gix's cost. But can we make even more out of Gix's ability? We sure can. Archfiend of Ifnir is absolutely insane in this deck. Once we're ready to start dumping our hand and seal our opponent's cards, we'll also be wiping the board while we do it. Even discarding away just 7 cards might be enough to wipe out the board. Make it 8 if someone's running Avacyn Angel of Hope. That might even be overkill since we're wiping the board while also potentially free casting a bunch of creatures afterwards. It might not even matter if our creatures have Shadow if our opponents don't have any blockers at all. So good. Bone Miser is another amazing card once we start discarding a bunch of cards. We'll create 2/2 zombie tokens for each creature discarded, get 2 black mana for each land discarded, and we draw a card for each other card we're discarding. So we can actually draw into more cards thanks to this. That's how insane this card is in the deck. It is beyond versatile here. Containment Construct is also useful as helping us quote-unquote keep any cards we don't want to lose. We can hold off on dropping a land in our turn in order to have one more card to discard to Gix, and then just exile it to the construct and replay it later to not lose it. Or if we have Bone Miser, we could be adding a lot of black mana, so we could potentially also cast any spells we are discarding. This card is amazing here. Living Death is another great way of making the most of what we're discarding. Most of our creatures are Weenies anyways, so losing them to Living Death isn't that bad if we've been discarding a bunch of creatures this whole time. Not only that, but it's also a great way to recover from a board wipe. It's also a board wipe itself, and one that can get past Indestructible and Regeneration too. Its only downside is being symmetric. But that's what Bojuka Bog is for. Just hold on to casting Living Death until you have this land in hand first. In any case, it's already good against graveyard decks and doesn't take up a slot in the deck anyways. And either way, you can always just cast either Toxic Deluge and Damnation if anyone did have a board that was worse than yours. It's always important to have non-synergistic removal in your deck anyways. Just be wary of your life total with Toxic Deluge. But even if you are paying a lot of life with the deck, Font of Agonies makes the most of it. This thing gets a ton of counters on it. You can then use them to snipe creatures left and right, whether to prevent blocks or just get rid of things that are better off dead to us. Feed the Swarm also provides spot removal, but one time only and also at the cost of life. But more importantly, it gets rid of enchantments. Last thing we need is getting stuck behind some annoying pillow fort effect that prevents us from attacking. Back to recovery, Witch's Cottage is another way to recover any creature we either discarded or died for whatever reason. The creature is top deck, but that doesn't matter since we're drawing so many cards all the time. And since it's a swamp, it can be fetched for with any of the deck's 4 fetch lands, as well as synergizing with the previously mentioned effects that care about our swamps. Elixir of Immortality is the last recovery effect in the deck and has various uses. We do have the potential of decking ourselves with this deck, so being able to reuse all of those discarded cards by shuffling them back into our library can help delay losing that way. We can also just activate this at instant speed in response to someone trying to exile our graveyard. And as a bonus, it also gains us 5 life when we do activate it. It's also super cheap to cast. Thought Vessel, Decanter of Endless Water, and Reliquary Tower help us keep our fat hand because we want to be able to steal as many cards from our opponents as possible. So if we're drawing into dozens of cards per turn, we want to be able to keep them until we're ready to activate Gix. Sandstone Oracle and Villas Broker of Blood are more ways of getting our hand into ridiculous levels. Sandstone Oracle was that creature I mentioned earlier, blinking with Sword of Hearth and Home. When it enters the battlefield, we draw cards equal to the difference between an opponent and ourselves. Well, if we just discarded our hand, we're going to be drawing some cards thanks to it, to say the least. As for Villas, he's absolutely busted here. He essentially turns all of Gix's triggers into double draws. We pay 1 life to draw a card, and then Villas draws us another card for having paid that life. Combine this with other effects in the deck like Alhammarret's Archive, and you can see why the limitless hand size cards are so good here. Oh, they're also flyers, so we can also use them to potentially draw cards. Villas especially, since he's an 8/8. Not only that, but he can also help us get rid of creatures at the cost of 1 black mana and 2 life, which will also draw us 2 cards. Combine him with Keurig and we can pay 4 life to draw 4 cards and give a creature -1/-1 until end of turn. With enough life, we won't even need the mana, just as mono black decks require. Lastly, War Room is including for drawing cards at the cost of life, which is not only flavorful, but also doesn't take up a slot in the deck for being a land. Villas definitely loves this land for sure. Other ways of making the most of Gix's abilities is synergizing with his Thievery strategy. Brave Stealer Dragon has the potential of being a win con on its own. Each time a non-land permanent an opponent owns enters the battlefield under our control, they lose life equal to its mana value. Well, we'll be able to cast any non-land spell for free with Gix, meaning that we can be taking away a lot of our opponent's life. If that weren't enough, it also has a built-in Thievery effect, but we do have to pay mana for that. Fortunately, we can use that mana as if it were any color. Oh, and it's also a 6/6 flyer, which is even more relevance for this deck. Illusionist's Bracers help us literally steal twice as many cards each time we activate Gix, so we can just activate him once, discard X cards, but then exile the top X cards twice, or from 2 different opponents. Hopefully, opponents don't start scooping after you're stealing most of their deck. Then again, if they are scooping, then you're just winning too. Exotic Orchard, City of Brass, and Mana Confluence are included for those things we steal that have activated abilities we can make the most of. The deck is mono black, so we don't really need them to pay for our own things. And thanks to Gix, we don't even need to pay casting costs, but being unable to pay for any useful activated costs outside of our color would be quite the bummer. Besides, City of Brass and Mana Confluence hurting us also synergize with the deck, so it's win-win. This brew is just an idea of how to build around Gix Phyrexian Praetor. This deck draws into so many cards, is also drawing cards off of our opponent's libraries, much to their chagrin. I love these kinds of decks where you can fill it with a bunch of weenies you wouldn't normally see in Commander games because players are more focused on big, splashy creatures, or utility creatures if they happen to be small. But just like my Dalsim and Edric deck, this one goes fast. In fact, probably faster, since you're basically playing with 4 libraries, so the possibilities are endless. If you're interested in the deck list of this spicy brew of mine, you can find a link to it down in the description. I would like to thank all my patrons for supporting me, and a quick shout out to all my higher tier patrons, the Brewers, for their patronage. I'd also like to thank anyone using my TCG Player affiliate link. That also helps out the channel. And to everyone, thanks for watching this episode of The Brewery on the Commander Tavern. I am the Bandit Kirby, and happy brewing.